Yamunachira vanachari Dhamma Kunjabiha Kunjabiha Gopi Janavala Vivarada Yasodhana Bhagavata Yasodhana Yasodhana Vanachari Madhava Kunjabiha Gopi Jana Vallabha Givaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Givaradhari Yashodanandana Bhaja Jana Vansana Yashodanandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Kunjabiha Kunjabiha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Ram Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Shri Prabhupada ki Jai Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 4, today's text is text number 31. Yach Chaktayo Batatam Vadim Vai. Vivadha Samvadha Bhuvo Bhavanti. Kurvanti Chaisam Muhur Atma Moham. Tasme Namo Nanta Gunaya Bhumne. Yat Shaktayo Vadatam Vadinam Vai. Vivadha Samvadha Bhuvo Bhavanti. Kurvanti Chaisam Muhur Atma Moham. Tasme Namo Nanta Gunaya Bhumne.
Yakshaktayo vadatam vadinam vai Divam Padam
Yat Saktaya, whose multifarious potencies, Vadatam, speaking different philosophies, Vadinam, of the speakers. Why, indeed, Vivada, of argument, Samvada, an agreement, Bhuva, the causes, Bhavanti, are, Kurvanti, create, Cha, and Esam, of them the theorists, who continuously, Atma Moham, bewilderment regarding the existence of the soul. Tasme, unto him, Nama, my respectful obeisances. Ananta, unlimited. Gunaya, possessing transcendental attributes. Gumne, the all-pervading Godhead. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all-pervading Supreme Personality of Godhead, who possesses unlimited transcendental qualities. Acting from within the core of the hearts of all philosophers who propagate various views, he causes them to forget their own souls, while sometimes agreeing and sometimes disagreeing amongst themselves. Thus, he creates within this material world a situation in which they are unable to come to a conclusion. I offer my obeisances unto him, purport by Srila Prabhupada. Since time immemorial, or since the creation of the cosmic manifestation, the conditioned souls have formed various parties of philosophical speculation. But this is not true of the devotees. Non-devotees have different ideas of creation, maintenance, and annihilation, and therefore they are called vadis and prativadis, proponents and counter-proponents. It is understood from the statement of the Mahabharata that there are many munis or speculators. Tarko pratishta sutayo vibhina. Nasav Sri Risir Yasya Matam Na Bhina. All speculators must disagree with other speculators. Otherwise, why should there be so many opposing parties concerned with ascertaining the supreme cause? Philosophy means finding the ultimate cause. As Vedanta Sutra very reasonably says, Atato Brahma Jignasa. Human life is meant for understanding the ultimate cause. Devotees accept that the ultimate cause is Krishna because this conclusion is supported by all Vedic literature and also by Krishna himself, who says, Aham Sarvasya Prabhuva. I am the source of everything. Devotees have no problem understanding the ultimate cause of everything. But non-devotees must face many opposing elements because everyone who wants to be a proponent philosopher invents his own way. In India, there are many parties of philosophers such as the Advaitavadis, Vaisheshikas, Mimamsakas, Mayavadis, and Swabhavavadis, and each of them opposes the others. Similarly, in the Western countries, there are also many philosophers with different views of creation, life, maintenance, and annihilation. Thus, it is undoubtedly a fact that there are countless philosophers throughout the world, each of them contradicting the others. Now, one might ask why there are so many philosophers if the ultimate goal of philosophy is one. Undoubtedly, the ultimate cause is one, the Supreme Brahman. As Arjuna told Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 10:12, Param Brahma Param Dharma Pavitram Paramam Bhavam Purusham Sasvatam Divyam Adi Devam Agam Ajam Vibhum. You are the supreme Brahman, the ultimate, the supreme abode and purifier, the absolute truth, and the eternal divine person. You are the primal God, transcendental and original, and you are unborn and all-pervading beauty. Non-devotee speculators, however, do not accept the ultimate cause, sarva karana karanam, because they are ignorant and bewildered concerning the soul and its activities. Even though some of them have a vague idea of the soul, many controversies arise, and the philosophical speculators can never reach a conclusion. All of these speculators are envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita 16:19-20, Tan aham dvisata kruran samsareshu naradhanam dhaman sipami ajasram asubhan asuris eva yonisu asrim yonim apna mudha janmani janmani mam aprayaiva kunteya tato yanti adhanam gatim. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, are cast by me into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life, attaining repeated birth among the species of demoniac life. Such persons can never approach me. Gradually, they sink down to the most abominable type of existence. Because of their envy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, non-devotees are born in demoniac families life after life. They are great offenders, and because of their offenses, the Supreme Lord keeps them always bewildered. Kurvanti chaisam muhur atmam moham. The Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, purposely keeps them in darkness, Atma Mohan. The great authority, Parasara, the father of Vyasadeva, explains the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jnana Shakti Bailasya Laisvarya Virya Tejamsi SS Sataha. Bhagavat Chabdha Vachyani Vinayayar Gunadhibi. The demoniac speculators cannot understand the transcendental qualities, form, pastimes, strength, knowledge, and opulence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which are all free from material contamination. These speculators are envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jagat Ahur Aniswaram. Their conclusion is that the entire cosmic manifestation has no controller, but is just working naturally. Thus they are kept in constant darkness birth after birth, and cannot understand the real cause of all causes. This is the reason why there are so many schools of philosophical speculation. Om Gyanatimrandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumitam Yana Tasmai Shri Guruve Vanchakalpa Trubhyasya Kripa Sindhurevacha Patita Nama Pavanebhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaur Bhakta Vranda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we continue with the Hamsa Guhya prayers. Daksha, of course, is reciting this Hamsa Guhya prayers. We learned last week, and of course, of the last many verses, that this Hamsa Guhya prayers was existing elsewhere in the Bhagavatam. It's not that it's an original composition by Daksha. And we can see from the verses here that, the Lord is very, very pleased with these Hamsa Guhya prayers. So we also learned that, plagiarism, which it seems like Daksha has committed over here, in the context of the Srimad Bhagavatam, is very, very encouraged in a spiritual subject matter. That we don't mind, learning from advanced devotees about the qualities of prayers and how to make wonderful prayers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in this particular verse, we can see that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is being glorified. He has unlimited transcendental qualities. And of course, most times it is very difficult for us to understand, this word unlimited, because of course, in the material world, there's so many limitations. And of course, most of us, in one sense, have learned that seeing is believing. This is the mantra that, generally is propagated. And, we grow up thinking that seeing is believing. But gradually, as we take up spiritual life more and more seriously, we understand that the material world is like a prison house, that we're trapped in this prison house. We're spirit souls ultimately, undergoing some material experience in the material world. And of course, the verse is also explaining how these philosophers, so of course, growing up in America, uh, one sees that one of the easiest forms of study that one can take in college is philosophy class, because everything goes. Everybody's got some philosophy. And so, persons are in one sense encouraged that, yes, whatever philosophy you have, you can come and expound in these classes. And so, of course, they also teach, different types of Mayavad philosophies, and so many, anything goes practically. Uh, so, of course, we see the current situation in Kali Yuga, in the material world now, that, there's all these gender fluidity, non-binary, uh, and we just learned recently that even in schools, one of the devotees was telling us that in her school, I think what's grade school, middle school, I think, persons are identifying as animal. So it's nothing that can be done to these children. Some of them even come to classes in school. This is regular school, mainstream school. They come to classes with a tail attached to their body. And so, they're identifying as animal, and, Of course, in the school system, there's no discrimination, so it latches onto this no discrimination. So we see that philosophy is very rampant. People propagating their own philosophy, and we understand from this verse that sometimes this is created where these philosophers, uh, well, it's said in this verse, thus he creates within this material world a situation in which they are unable to come to a conclusion. So that's the big challenge with all these philosophers, that there's no conclusion and anything goes, everything goes. Uh, and we see that from the purport, Prabhupada is explaining that these philosophers, they just remain in the material world, stuck lifetime after lifetime. Uh, and it's also explained that um, they take birth in demoniac families and can continue taking birth in demoniac families lifetime after lifetime, remaining stuck, and it seems like forever. So some of the points that Prabhupada makes is that one might ask why there are so many philosophies if the ultimate goal of philosophy is one. And of course, Prabhupada is stressing that undoubtedly the ultimate cause is one, the Supreme Brahman. And he quotes the Bhagavad Gita, verse 10, 12. You are the Supreme Brahman, the ultimate, the supreme abode and purifier, the absolute truth, and the eternal divine person. You are the primal God, transcendental and original, and you are unborn and all-pervading beauty. Non-devotee speculators, however, do not accept the ultimate cause. So this is, our unfortunate position, that we're all envious of Krishna, and this is why, we're in this material world. And the goal of life is to understand who we are, what is our purpose, and ultimately how to go back home, back to Godhead. So one example I wanted to speak a little bit about is the example of Govardhan Hill pastime. So all of us are familiar with the Govardhan Hill pastime, where Lord Indra had become very puffed up, um, and was thinking that he was so supreme that the residents of Raj would regularly, on a yearly basis, perform Indra Puja. But we see in this pastime, Lord Krishna had explained to Nanda Maharaj uh, why he should not perform Indra Puja. And in one sense, if we analyze, Krishna's reasons why he gave Nanda Maharaj, he gave, I think it was 5 or 6 arguments to Nanda Maharaj why he should not perform Indra Puja. And he was explaining things like, karma is supreme, the modes of material nature are supreme, and all sorts of alternative theories he was giving to Nanda Maharaj to try to convince him. And it seemed like after his explanation, if we just read the sequence of the events, that Nanda Maharaj eventually accepted, based on Krishna's reasoning, which was all atheistic principles that he had given in one sense. Um, but we see that in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that Nanda Maharaj accepted Krishna's reason only because it was Krishna's desire to perform Indra Puja. So it wasn't, because of all these materialistic reasons. And so even the Brajvasis, they were also very, very satisfied to continue doing Govardhan Puja based on Krishna's desire. So this is what we want to try to practice and become like the residents of Raj, be able to do things that Krishna wants and not our own concoction, not somebody else's concoction. And in this way perform things for Krishna's pleasure. So this way we'll be able to understand clearly how to be able to go back home, back to Godhead. Uh, Otherwise, we can again remain stuck in this material world lifetime after lifetime. And so we see from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, another example is given that Lord Chaitanya, during his time um, on the planet, that uh, there were so many Mayavadi philosophers, actually just so many atheistic philosophers as well. And it was rampant in India at the time that there were just so many philosophers. So we see Nimai, as a young boy, gradually he was, challenging all of these philosophers and, would go around debating persons just using pure logic and reason. Of course, ultimately he was gradually giving them love of Godhead um, as he was moving around uh, with his followers throughout India. We see that Lord Chaitanya, uh, actually Navadvip at that time was just rampant with all of these, so-called scholars, philosophers, who was giving some sort of bogus theory. And Lord Chaitanya, of course, initially, even though it was his birthplace, it was just so difficult, to convince, all of these persons that he initially decided to travel to South India. And so we see all the pastimes that unfolded in South India, where he was, challenging so many um, persons and, gradually giving them love of Godhead. Using logic and reason initially, we see the example of so many Digvijay Pandits that he had defeated gradually and given them love of Godhead. So, of course, we find that the basis of all of these speculators is false pride. And, this is one of the most difficult things for us to overcome is false pride. Everybody wants to show that, they are also supreme and powerful in so many different ways, that they've got unique contributions in society. And so this false pride is very, very difficult to shake off. But we find that, from the example of Lord Chaitanya, that, as he was preaching um, this cult of Krishna consciousness uh, throughout the India and giving persons the love of Godhead, uh, gradually these philosophers were being defeated. And as they were defeated, they were also taking up this uh, Harinam Sankirtan and propagating it further and further. And gradually we see that, so many persons became enveloped in Krishna consciousness. We also have this opportunity. Prabhupada has given us, so much um, of teachings, so much of books that he has translated, all for our benefit, so that we don't get confused, don't get caught up in any bogus philosophies. Uh, we're of course so grateful that Srila Prabhupada has given us Bhagavad Gita as it is. Prior to Bhagavad Gita as it is, of course, we understand that there's so many hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of translations, of Bhagavad Gitas, and it's about reading the Bhagavad Gita and seeing if you can align to the writer's philosophy. And so people have been choosing, this writer is more famous, that writer is more famous, this person's translation is more famous. But of course, all of these Bhagavad Gitas that were translated are devoid of bhakti. And so we see Prabhupada's translation gives us essence of Krishna's message in the Bhagavad Gita. And of course, we understand from Bhagavad Gita the ultimate understanding is that, Krishna says, give up all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. So it's a gradual process for devotees to be able to make progress on the path of bhakti. And we find that in the association of devotees, we can make gradual progress in this journey back home, back to Godhead. So some encouraging things we find in the world today, this day and age. Of course, there's so much of craziness going on with the upcoming elections, October, November, 1 month away. Wow. Recently, I think it was Louisiana, they just passed a law putting back the 10 Commandments in schools. So there was a 1980 ruling from the Supreme Court that removed the 10 Commandments from schools. And so it seems like, the states are now considering again bringing this back. So it's a good thing in one sense because, even that 10 Commandments was, lost over time. And, so many Christians are not even taking heed or forgetting, these basic 10 Commandments. So at least they can use that as a springboard, to continue in their spiritual life. And hopefully one day they'll, come across a devotee, get a book, make some contact with devotees, and, their real spiritual life will be able to take off. Also, we see in the last couple of weeks this calamity, disaster in the North Carolina, Asheville. And, from that town in Asheville, most persons had relocated to Asheville, thinking that this was the safest town in America. So persons had analyzed that, where's the safest place in terms of the weather to live in this country. And of course, persons are saying that California sometimes gets too hot, Florida gets too hot, different parts are too cold. And, subjectively, persons are analyzing like this. And we see that, some so-called intelligent persons have analyzed the country and they have decided that Asheville was, a very, very nice location, very, very safe location. They've studied, the weather data for this location over the few hundred years, whatever, was existing, and decided. But we just see the devastation. I don't know what's the recent death toll, 160 to 50, something like that. Persons lost their life due to the flooding. So we see that, in that example, just trying to use logic and reason, won't always bear the fruits that we want. So there's a limited point that we can use logic and reason. Of course, we have intelligence for a reason, and we need to use it very intelligently, but we see it devoid of the spiritual context and, the spiritual context, one won't get too far. And of course, we see in this case, these persons have lost their lives and, will have to take another birth. So of course, the question is, what birth will they take again? And according to their activities, it will dictate their next birth. And so we see in the material world, persons are addicted to sense pleasure. And, this is directing most of us. But we can see that from understanding the Shastra, this is not the best avenue to pursue, because we understand that sex pleasure is one of the highest pleasures in the world. And, there's so many persons, delving in this area, trying to satisfy their senses in this way by sex pleasure. But if one continues in the cycle, we understand that, one will have to take birth in the next life in the lower species. Because, if one is addicted to sex pleasure, for example, we find that the pigeons, for example, they can engage in sex life at least 100 times a day. So, if one is addicted to these kinds of things, I think mice holds the record of engaging in sex life, that they can do it for many, many hours during the day, up to 24 hours, it's explained. So in this way, we end up just taking birth in the lower species of life. So this idea of philosophical speculation does not get us too far in the material world. And we want to get out of the cycle of birth and death and be able to become eligible to go back home. So what else did I have? Atheistic philosophers. So we see, of course, Hiranyakashipu. He was, of course, a very empowered demon. And it seemed like at some point, if we look at the pastime of Hiranyakashipu, when his brother had passed away, Bhagavatam, gives details of that description, that, he was pacifying the family members about Hiranyaksha's death. And we see that, he was presenting very, very nice words, explaining, karma, and he was even went to the extent of explaining the power of the Supreme, that, we are not in control. Karma is going to come for everybody. And it seemed like in his presentation that he was, presenting in one sense theism. But ultimately we understand that, he was very, very envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And of course, we are, know the pastime of his downfall and how eventually he was killed. So we need to be careful of these types of philosophers that, try to lure us. And, there's just so many philosophers around now that sometimes, even if one leaves Krishna consciousness, one is seeking someone to follow. And ultimately, we need to understand that we're actually envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is why we're in the material. So I'll stop there. If there's any more comments, questions, please.
My question is sometimes even within ISKCON is fine that Prabhupada has set the standards, but at the same time there are some philosophies where in the name of practicality what Prabhupada has given is diluted, or in the on the other extreme, since they they stick so much to the standards that it becomes practically not possible to follow. So there are so many philosophies also within this camp. Then how do we navigate amongst all such philosophies where we are on right path?
Yes, this is why Prabhupada, thank you. This is why Prabhupada, has given us all of his books, and, he wanted us to scrutinizingly study his books. We can see in this example of this particular verse, it's just a few sentences verse, but Prabhupada has given such an elaborate purport to the verse, citing Bhagavad Gita 2 times in this purport, using that as motivation for his analysis of this actual verse. So Prabhupada didn't want us to be blind followers. And, that's why his books are so accessible and translated, for our understanding, very, very simply put. And so in this way, Prabhupada has given, so much of literature that we can also understand, when there is deviation. So as much as, there is some hierarchy to our structure in ISKCON, still the knowledge is accessible for everybody. So yes, even in terms of accepting a spiritual master, for example, in ISKCON, we understand that, this is very necessary for our advancement in spiritual life to accept a spiritual master. But we see, the Shastra is very, very clear in terms of the qualifications of a spiritual master. So, it all depends on our mood, on, how we are inquiring. Are we inquiring in a very puffed up way, or are we inquiring very, very submissively? So all the qualifications for choosing a spiritual master are very, very, nicely laid out for us to understand. This is how things need to be done. Yes, sometimes, devotees, we're all, of course, struggling with our senses. Uh, so even in ISKCON, we're not exempt in one sense because we're all in the material world. And so devotees definitely use, Prabhupada said, out of context most time. And so when devotees are quoting, Shastra, that's why it's always nice to get the reference and see what the context was. And so in this way, we don't get caught up in any sort of nonsense that may be going on, time, place, circumstance. Uh, and also, ISKCON is an international society. There's just so many senior devotees available, for us to ask and question and get input from, so that we don't get trapped in Maya's snare. I hope that's okay. Any more comments, questions? Yes.
I was wondering in regards to happiness of service, Bhagavad is always coming and going. And we learn whether we use sufficient tolerating that as being pressure conscious, but just on like a practical day-to-day level, if we're experiencing something that's like this stress, I'm wondering how can one or maybe personally what's an approach just dealing with that?
Yes, nice question. So, of course, being in the material world, we're subjected to happiness and distress at every moment. But we understand from Bhagavad Gita that, this happiness and distress, comes and goes, like the changing of the seasons. They just come and go. But we have to tolerate. But of course, if we read the purport there, it is explained that, we need knowledge. And so we have to use that knowledge to be able to understand, our situation of, exactly what is going on. So knowledge, of course, is available in the scripture, in the Shastra, in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam. Otherwise, senior devotees are there to help us, to guide us, uh, and give us, guidance and shelter, with whatever situation is going on. So we all need to have, devotee association, senior devotees, friends. There's also juniors that we can give shelter to. So in this way, there's this whole, variety available to help us and to guide us. So we understand that, the tongue sometimes is very, very loose, in certain situations. of devotees' lives. But again, having that knowledge that tongue sometimes can be used very encouragingly, or not so motivating in one sense. And so one can analyze with senior devotees about the particular situation. I guess for all of us, it's a personal journey, spiritual life, in one sense, as much as so much of help is there. But we all need, to be honest with ourselves, where we are, where we're at in our journey, and um, take such association that uplifts us, that gradually we can see our own advancement in Krishna consciousness. Because otherwise we can remain stuck. We've heard of examples of devotees that practicing, or so-called practicing, for 30 years, just being around, but not any spiritual advancement. And gradually see, that's how we see sometimes persons after 20 or 30 years fall down. It's no surprise in one sense, when someone falls down. So yes, sometimes this happiness and distress is there, but we shouldn't be excited either way, uh, unless we're evaluating our own advancement in Krishna consciousness. And in terms of our advancement, we want to see ourselves advancing all the time, and that's why we want to take steps. Set some short-term goals, medium-term goals, long-term goals of where we are. Of course, it's difficult to understand, what is Krishna's plan, but most times, in our humble circumstances, um, we can understand our situation, in the association of devotees. So we may not have all the answers, to exactly where am I going, but if we do it in the proper mood of bhakti, in the proper mood of surrender and devotion, then the super soul in the heart will reach out and guide us. So that much, we should become convinced of in our spiritual lives, that Krishna is in the heart, and ultimately, he will guide us. Of course, our spiritual master is there to guide us, for those devotees that have taken shelter like that. But also ultimately, we should not disregard the super soul in the heart that can also, guide us. So, of course, we need to be trained in these things, and this is where, the spiritual master, senior devotees can help guide and train us. But again, sometimes it's a very, very personal thing that we need to look deep down within our heart. Ultimately, we're understanding that, it's the heart that we want to clean. So many lifetimes of conditioning is there, that, sometimes it's not so easy to trust. But gradually, as we chant this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, that we begin to shed these layers. So this is why Srila Prabhupada has given us this 16 rounds to chant daily, 4 regulative principles, so that, gradually, as we practice with sincerity, these layers start to get shed. And, we gradually can see in our own lives, for those of us that have been practicing for, some time, even though a short time, a few years it may be, but we can see the effects of, this chanting, that our lives are becoming better. And, this is what keeps devotees, moving on in their spiritual lives. So we need to get to a space where, despite calamities that may come, of course, most of us don't want to become like Queen Kunti, for obvious reasons, because Queen Kunti was praying, bring on the calamities, because in this way, when the calamities come, then automatically I remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So of course, this is very, very advanced stage of practicing Krishna consciousness. But at least, we can understand that whatever it takes to remember Krishna, we should practice. I hope that gives some ideas. Any more comments, questions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribo.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for a very insightful class. My question relates to your experience as a leading administrator in ISKCON. So there's on the specific issue of disaster management. So the conflict in the Middle East may break out into a world war. And one philosophy on disaster management is, from ISKCON's perspective, is that, okay, we just do what we did, after the disappearance of Prabhupada, which was a disaster in one sense. And we just ramp up book distribution, ramp up prasadam distribution. And then another philosophy is, no, we actually do the physical preparation. So we ramp up the food production and make our farms more productive. So from your experience on public administration, how do competing philosophies win? It's not just a free market of ideas where the best idea wins. Sometimes there's prevailing circumstances in terms of who has more cash, who has more political power, and the best ideas don't always win. And we see even with Bhagavad Gita, even though having a devotee such as Yudhishthira Maharaj to rule the world was the best idea, it required death of tens of millions of Kshatriyas to actually enforce that. It required a military conquest and fight. So what is the solution to this, to these kinds of issues that affect practically the whole society?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand if you have a specific point or you just want a general view of what to do.
Yeah, what to do. So you can see there's two opposing views. And as an administrator, you can see which one is better. But you might not have all the resources to enforce that or to establish it as the best. So as an administrator, what do you do in those situations?
Yes, of course, we want to try our best, in all circumstances, if not only with this example that you're giving, in terms of, administration, but in all circumstances, we want to try our best. And I mean, the one example, which is not exactly applicable, but I'm thinking of is, we know the example of the Brahmana, who was blind. And his spiritual master had, instructed him, to read the Bhagavad Gita. And so we see that, at some point, even though he was blind, still he was following the order of his guru. So my understanding is, in all circumstances, whether we are capable or not capable, whether we have money, we don't have money, we should still try our best. And our understanding from the Shastra is that, Krishna will definitely help. We see the example of Srila Prabhupada when he came, to America for that matter. How many rupees did he have? 30, 40 rupees or something like that he had in his pocket. But, he didn't have much. And so still he was trying his best. He had the order of his spiritual master, to preach this Krishna consciousness in the West. And so he carried that with him. That was his life and soul. And we see what Krishna has done, with this kind of idea that he was carrying with him. Look at ISKCON today. From the humble beginnings when Prabhupada, came, had so many heart attacks on the ship, the Jaladuta, so much has become manifest. So like I was saying earlier, all these answers are not there. Still, we need to try our best. So as an administrator, we can see that, there's so much of crises in the world today, and it just seems to be escalating. And of course, we'll see in a few weeks' time, uh, possibly, maybe even some culmination, to these kinds of escalations that's going on worldwide. Middle East, not only the Middle East, just everywhere in the world, there's so much of craziness. So from the Bhagavatam perspective, we understand this is Kali Yuga. We don't expect, in one sense, any surprises. So I don't think we'll be surprised if a world war breaks out or anything. These things are there. But still, Prabhupada gave us so much in his books. He stressed so much, growing food. He had, in one sense, spoken about, the factories not being able to maintain society. And he had spoken about farm communities. And so, even though we, at least here at Gitanagri, don't have so many resources, still we should remain convinced and, have some conviction that, Prabhupada wanted us to grow food, on our farms. And, he was certainly very, very pleased when he came to Gitanagri and all our farm projects in general. Whenever he visited these projects, he was very, very pleased with the devotees, growing food. And so we need to remain convinced, in Prabhupada's teachings and Prabhupada's desires. And in this way, let's see, what will develop from this, as time goes by. So much, has been done over the many decades here in Gitanagari. And we can also, see practically Krishna's hand, in this short space of time in Gitanagari specifically, that despite none of us here on the farm, having formal training in agriculture, having grown up on a farm, that somehow or the other, even though we are breaking so many things in the process, still somehow or the other, Krishna is helping and pushing us forward. So, I think the solution is, not to be deterred. And, even though everybody might not agree, because for the city temples, Prabhupada said books are the basis, not only for the city temples, of course, for everybody in general, because we all need to study the Shastra. But, the focus on Sankirtan is different in the cities compared to the farm communities. So we need to stay with our dharma on a farm, in one sense, because the example is given in the Bhagavad Gita, right, of Arjuna. Arjuna had given so many powerful reasons why he should not fight in the war. So many people are going to die. So many tens of thousands of soldiers are going to die. So many, so much of calamity is going to result if he fights in the war. But of course, Krishna explained to him that he has to do his duty. As a Kshatriya, he has to fight. And, in the Bhagavad Gita also there is a verse which says that, we rather do our duty than do someone else's duty perfectly. We rather do our own duty imperfectly. So, from these examples, we can see that, we need to stay with our dharma on a farm, growing food, taking care of the cows, just like Nanda Maharaj had done. And, one day we may be blessed because, that benediction is there in one sense. The previous temple president, Paramananda Prabhu, I don't know if you have read that somewhere, but at some point in Gitanagari, he was explaining to Prabhupada when Prabhupada had come that there's so many cows, the herd is growing, and he was asking for practical ideas, practical guidance, how to manage, a large herd. And I forget, the number was probably 100 or 200 cows they had. And Prabhupada's remark was, Nanda Maharaj had 900,000 cows. What is the problem? So maybe that benediction is coming sometime in the future, 900,000 cows. And this temple president had tried again, to explain to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada again, Nanda Maharaj had 900,000 cows. What is the problem? So, with these examples there, we can see anything is possible. And of course, we see from, the way ISKCON has expanded, worldwide, anything is possible. So I take strength from that and pray for blessings of the devotees, blessings of Sri Sri Radha Damodar, that somehow we can continue to please Srila Prabhupada and the Guru Parampara. I hope that's okay.
Great, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Very well. Okay. Any more comments, questions? Okay, we're ready to do Guru Puja. Thank you, Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Sri Prabhupada ki jai, Go Premanandi. I think they're going to do greetings first.
What?
I think they're going to do greetings first.
That's the way that usually is.
Well, there was another plan.
Or
Another plan of change.
what was the involved? Shri Radha Damodar ki jai.